A quick reminder, the first method of calculating the determinant of a 3x3 system works for 3x3 systems, but not systems that are 4x4 or higher. So the method we just saw, we start with a 3x3, and then we rewrite columns 1 and 2 to the right of it. And from here, we multiply the numbers going down to the right and add those products. And then we multiply the numbers going up to the right and subtract those products. And this is the process we use for Cramer's rule for the first method to find the determinant. But since we cannot use this method for anything but 3x3s, we want to have a second method that we can use for both 3x3 systems and systems that are 4x4 or higher. So you'll start with some 3x3 system, and you'll wind up working with 3 individual 2x2 matrices. And each matrix is preceded by a multiplier. Now we'll dive into the details of how we go from this 3x3 to these multipliers times these matrices. But a few things to review before we take a look at that process. Any row or column in the 3x3 can be used to create the resulting 2x2 systems. The multiplier of each 2x2 is the number in the 3x3 being used to create that 2x2. Now, something to keep in mind, the 2x2s that you get will vary based on the row or column that you choose to eliminate from the 3x3. So the 2x2s may be different, but the final determinants that you get will be the same, regardless of which row or column that you choose to eliminate from the 3x3. Now, I will always eliminate row number 1 just to make things easy. And what you want to do is, you first want to start with the first number in that row or column. This will be your multiplier. You draw a line through the remaining row and that same column. And the 2x2 is the resulting numbers that are not crossed out. So 5, 6, 8, 9 with a multiplier of 1. And now we have the next number in that same row, since I'm crossing out row number 1. So that would be 2, this multiplier here. Cross out the numbers in that same row and the same column. And the 2x2 are the numbers that are not crossed out, so 4, 7, 6, 9. And then we complete it by going to the last number in that row, 3. So that would be the multiplier here. Cross out the numbers in that row and in that column. And our new 2x2 is 4, 5, 7, 8. So that is how we wind up with these 3 2x2s. Now the sign in front of each 2x2 is determined by a sign box, like this one here. So we want to use a 3x3 sign box to choose the appropriate sign to place in front of each multiplier. So since we eliminated row 1, we want to use the signs in row 1. Positive 1 was in row 1, column 1. So since that's a positive sign, this would be positive 1. The multiplier 2 was in row 1, C2. So we put a negative in front of that 2. And the next sign is positive. So we place a positive in front of the 3. So since we chose to eliminate row 1, we use the signs from row 1. But if you use a column or a different row, you use the signs in that column or row. Again, for this chapter, I'm only going to use row 1 to keep things simple and consistent. That way it's easier to follow along. But let's go back to the beginning and work our way through an example. So you'll be asked to find the determinant of a 3x3. Column 1 is positive 1, negative 1, and positive 2. Column 2 is positive 1, negative 2, and positive 2. Column 3 is positive 1, positive 2, and negative 1. This is the same example that we used for method number 1. So you'll see that we will wind up getting this same determinant at the end. Step 1, circle the number in the first row in the first column. So the first row is furthest to the top. The first column is furthest to the left, so that would be here, +1. Now step 2, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So we draw a line through the remaining row and through that column. Now step 3, rewrite the number that is circled. So this would be our multiplier, 1. In step 4, create a 2x2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. So that would be these 4 numbers here, giving us a row of -2, +2, and a second row of 2, -1. So now we have our 2x2 created with the first number in row 1. So now we want to work on a 2x2 for the next number in that row. So step 5, circle the number in the first row and second column. That would be +1 here. And then step 6, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So we cross out those numbers and then we draw a line straight down. So now we have -1, 2 in this column here and 2, -1 in this column here. So step 7, rewrite the number that is circled, +1. And then step 8, create a 2x2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. So that'll create a row of -1, +2, and a second row of +2 and -1. So we have our second 2x2. So now we're ready to create our third 2x2. So we want to go to the next number in the same row. In step 9, circle the number in the first row and third column. So that's +1 here. In step 10, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So we'll use these 4 numbers to create our new 2x2. Step 11, rewrite the number that is circled. So this would be our multiplier for the third 2x2. And now step 12, create a 2x2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. So that would give us a row of -1, -2. And a second row of 2, 2. So now we have 3 2x2s, each with a multiplier in front of it. So now we want to use a sign box to place the appropriate signs in front of each one. So step 13, place the appropriate sign in front of each multiplier. So we want to write out a 3x3 sign box, which we can create by starting with positive sign, switching to the negative, switching back to positive, switching back to negative, so on and so forth. So you alter between positive, negative, all the way through. And you select the row or column that you use to eliminate. So again, I'll be using row 1 each time. So the first multiplier should have a positive sign in front of it, so we can leave that. The second 2x2 should have a negative in front of it, so that's where this negative sign comes from. And the third 2x2 should have a positive sign in front of it, so that's where this positive comes from. And now step 14, we can solve for D. So let's put this sign box to the side. So you want to calculate the determinant of the 2x2 the way you normally would, and then multiply that times the multiplier. So starting with this 2x2 here, we have 1 times, we find the determinant, so it's -2 times -1, minus 2 times 2. And now we evaluate this expression. So starting inside, we have -2 times -1, which would be +2, minus 2 times 2, which would be 4. 2 minus 4 is -2. And 1 times -2 is -2. So our first 2x2 is equivalent to -2. And now we move on to the second one. So starting with the 2x2 matrix, we have -1 times -1, minus 2 times 2. And we're going to multiply this entire thing times -1. So now we can evaluate this starting inside the brackets, giving us -1 times -1, which is +1. +1 minus 2 times 2 would be 4. So we get 1 minus 4. And 1 minus 4 would be -3. 1 times -3 is -3. Minus -3 is equivalent to +3. So now we know this 2 by 2 is equivalent to +3. And we can move on to the last 2 by 2 here. When we find the determinant of this matrix here, we get -1 times 2 minus 2 times -2. We're going to multiply this times +1. So starting inside of the brackets, we have -1 times 2, which is -2. -2 minus 2 times -2 would be minus -4. -2 minus -4 is the same as -2 plus 4. -2 plus 4 is +2. And 1 times 2 is +2. So we see that the determinant is equal to -2 plus 3, which should be +1. And +1 plus 2 is equal to +3. So we get the determinant of the 3 by 3 system is equal to +3. So that is how you go about finding the determinant of a 3 by 3 system using method number 2. Let's now have you try a few practice questions. These are the same 3 by 3 matrices we had for method number 1. So you'll see that the solutions to these two questions are the same as the ones that we did for method number 1. So you'll see that both methods work. So find the determinant. Question number 1. Column 1, we have 1, -2, +2. Column number 2, we have -1, +1, and +3. In column number 3, we have 2, -1, and -2. Question number 2, column number 1, we have 1, -1, and 3. Column number 2, we have -1, +2, and -3. Column number 3, we have -1, -2, and +1. Pause the video, answer these questions, and then press play when you are ready to begin. Step 1, circle the number in the first row in the first column. So that would be this 1 right here. Step 2, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So we draw a line through the same row, and then we draw a line through the same column, leaving us with the 2 by 2 here. So step 3, rewrite the number that is circled. So that would be +1. And then step 4, create a 2 by 2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out, which would be these 4 here. So we wind up with a 2 by 2. Step 5, circle the number in the first row and the second column. So we'll move from +1 to -1, circle -1. And then step 6, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So we draw a line through those and draw a line straight down, leaving us with these 4 numbers that are not crossed out. And now step 7, rewrite the number that is circled. That would be -1. In step 8, create a 2 by 2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. So that would give us this 2 by 2. And now we want to create a third 2 by 2. So step 9, circle the number in the first row in the third column. That would be +2. Step 10, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So we draw a line through these 2 numbers and draw a line through these 2 numbers, creating a new 2 by 2 with these 4 numbers here. Step 11, rewrite the number that is circled. That would be +2. In step 12, create a 2 by 2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out, which would be these 4 numbers here. So now we have 3 2 by 2 systems with multipliers in front of each one. So step 13, place the appropriate sign in front of each multiplier. So we can put this 3 by 3 to the side and create a sign box. And since we use the first row in our 3 by 3, we'll use the first row in this sign box for our signs. So the first multiplier should have a positive sign in front of it. So we can leave that as is, since that'll be the same. The second number in the row should have a negative sign placed in front of it. So that's where this negative comes from. And the third 2 by 2 should have a positive sign placed in front of it. That's where this comes from. And now we have all of the information we need to solve for D. So let's put the sign box to the side. And starting with the first 2 by 2, we have 1 times negative 2 minus 3 times negative 1. And we're multiplying this times positive 1. So starting inside of the brackets, we have 1 times negative 2, which would be negative 2, minus 3 times negative 1, which would be negative 3. Negative 2 minus negative 3 is equivalent to negative 2 plus 3. Negative 2 plus 3 is equal to positive 1. And 1 times 1 is equal to 1. So the first 2 by 2 gives us 1. The second 2 by 2, we get negative 2 times negative 2 minus 2 times negative 1. And we're going to multiply this times minus negative 1 on the outside. Starting on the inside, we have negative 2 times negative 2, which is positive 4. 4 minus 2 times negative 1 would be 4 minus negative 2, which is equivalent to 4 plus 2. And 4 plus 2 is 6. Negative 1 times 6 is negative 6. 1 minus negative 6 is 1 plus 6. So for the second 2 by 2, we get 6. And now we can move on to the third 2 by 2, which is negative 2 times 3 minus 2 times 1. And we'll multiply this times positive 2. Starting inside of the brackets, we have negative 2 times 3, which is negative 6, minus 2 times 1, which is 2. Negative 6 minus 2 is negative 8. 2 times negative 8 is negative 16. So now we see D is equal to 1 plus 6, which is 7. And 7 minus 16 is negative 9. So when we use method number 1, we found the determinant was equal to negative 9. And this time we use method number 2, and again the determinant is equal to negative 9. So that is the answer to question number 1. Let's now have a look at question number 2. Step 1, circle the number in the first row in the first column. So that would be this one here. And step 2, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. Step 3, rewrite the number that is circled. So that would be positive 1. In step 4, create a 2 by 2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. So that would be these 4 numbers here. And that gives us our first 2 by 2. We then move on to the next number in that row. So we go from positive 1 to negative 1. And now step 5, circle the number in the first row in the second column. In step 6, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. So cross those out, cross these out. Step 7, rewrite the number that is circled. That would be negative 1. In step 8, create a 2 by 2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. Negative 1 and 3 from column 1, and negative 2, 1 from column 3. So this is the resulting 2 by 2. And now we can create a third one by step 9, circling the number in the first row in the third column. And then step 10, draw lines through the other numbers in the same row and column. Step 11, rewrite the number that is circled, -1. In step 12, create a 2 by 2 matrix with the numbers that are not crossed out. So that would be these 4 numbers here. So now we have our 3 2 by 2s. So step 13, place the appropriate sign in front of each multiplier. So we can move this matrix to the side and create a 3 by 3 sign box. And since we used row 1 to create our 2 by 2s, we want to use the signs in row 1. So our first 2 by 2 is preceded by a positive sign, so we can leave that as is. The second 2 by 2 is preceded by a negative sign, so we place that in front of -1. And the third sign is positive, so we place that in front of -1 here. And now we can move the sign box to the side and use this information to solve for D. So starting with the first 2 by 2, we have 2 times 1 minus -3 times -2. We're going to multiply this times +1. Starting with the inside of the brackets, we have 2 times 1, which is 2, minus -3 times -2 is 6. 2 minus 6 is -4. 1 times -4 is -4. So the first 2 by 2 gives us -4. The next 2 by 2, we have -1 times 1 minus 3 times -2. And we'll have minus -1 on the outside of that. Starting inside, we have -1 times 1, which is -1. -1 minus 3 times -2 is minus -6. Minus -6 is equivalent to +6. So we get -1 plus 6, which is 5. -1 times 5 is -5. Minus -5 is +5. And now our third 2 by 2, we have -1 times -3 minus 3 times 2. And we'll multiply this times plus -1 or -1. So starting inside, we have -1 times -3, which is +3, minus 3 times 2, which is 6. 3 minus 6 is -3. -1 times -3 is +3. So we see D is equal to -4 plus 5, which is +1. 1 plus 3 shows us that D is equal to +4.